You're sitting there. Your resume is just perfectly formatted. You know your industry inside and out, and your technical skills are top tier.
Oh, absolutely. You're ready to go.
Right. You are completely ready. But then the interviewer switches from your native language into English. And they ask this slightly unexpected question, and suddenly it's like every single word of vocabulary you've ever learned just evaporates from your brain.
Oh, the absolute panic.
Yes, your heart rate spikes. You know the answer in Russian, obviously, but in English, you're just staring into the webcam camera like a deer in headlights.
It is the absolute definition of a high-pressure freeze. And, the really frustrating part is it happens to incredibly talented senior-level professionals all the time.
It really does.
Yeah, the language barrier suddenly becomes this, well, it feels like an intelligence barrier,
Yeah,
which is entirely unfair but very, very real.
completely. And today, we're fixing that. So consider this, your elite masterclass on interviewing confidently in English. We are doing a deep dive today.
A very necessary deep dive.
Definitely. We're looking at some really fascinating HR guides and cultural analyses that map out exactly how to bridge that gap. The gap between being a rock star in your native language and bringing that exact same authority into a Western interview room.
Right, because passing a high-level English interview, it isn't about perfectly translating your resume word for word. I mean, that's a trap.
A huge trap. We're breaking down the psychology, the idioms, and the structural mindset shifts you actually need to perform when the pressure is on.
Exactly. It's about translating your professional culture. It's about understanding the psychology of what a Western hiring manager is actually listening for.
So to help us navigate all this, the materials we're looking at today use this really effective framing device. They basically follow a conversation between two characters.
Right, Ivan and Olga.
Yes, exactly. First, there's Ivan, and Ivan is a highly intelligent candidate. He's a senior developer, completely brilliant, but the moment he has to interview in English, he just loses all his charisma.
Which is so relatable. And opposite him is Olga. She's a senior HR specialist and a career coach who understands exactly what top-tier international companies, places like Google, Amazon, or these big international startups, what they're actually looking for when they evaluate international candidates.
So let's jump right into the deep end, right where Ivan's anxiety is peaking. In the text, Ivan makes this confession to Olga. He says, I'm a mess. I know my field, but in English, my brain completely stops.
Wow.
It's such a relatable moment, isn't it?
It really is. It's a very honest, vulnerable confession. And linguistically, if we look at the phrasal verb to mess something up, which means, to ruin, fail, or make a severe mistake, Ivan is internalizing the language barrier as a personal failure.
Right.
By saying, I'm a mess, he's essentially just surrendering to the panic.
And it's a huge temptation to do exactly that in an interview. We have this reflex to apologize for our nerves. We think, well, if I just tell the interviewer, sorry, my English isn't great today, I'm a bit nervous, maybe they'll take pity on me and go easy.
Oh, but Olga's advice completely rejects that approach. She tells him to pivot to the exact opposite mindset.
Interesting. So no apologizing.
None. Yes, having nerves is human, obviously, but apologizing for them immediately frames you as a liability.
Wait, really? A liability?
Absolutely. The interviewer isn't looking for flawless grammar. They're looking for how you handle friction. Think about it. If you crumble and apologize because a simple sentence is hard to construct, what are you going to do when $1 million project goes off the rails?
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. If they aren't looking for perfect English grammar, which I think is what basically every non-native speaker is obsessing over,
Yeah.
what are they actually looking for?
They want your narrative. This is the biggest cultural shift highlighted in our sources. Western HR departments, especially at these massive international firms, they are moving far away from basic checkbox questions.
Right, the typical tell me your strengths kind of thing.
Exactly. They don't just want you to recite your daily duties. They want to know your story. How do you handle failure? How do you adapt?
I really want to dig into this concept of the narrative because in a lot of traditional, perhaps more Eastern European or post-Soviet corporate cultures, we're basically taught in school to go into an interview and read them a grocery list.
A grocery list.
Yeah, they're like, I did this task. I was responsible for this department. I completed these reports. It's very dry. But Western HR wants you to sit around a campfire and tell a compelling story where you are the protagonist.
That's a perfect visual, actually.
Oh, yeah.
The grocery list versus the campfire story. But, you have to be careful because being the protagonist doesn't mean just making things up or being overly dramatic.
Right, no fiction.
Right. It means claiming ownership of the impact you made.
But practically speaking, how do you do that? I mean, if I'm already terrified of using the wrong verb tense, how do I build a campfire story on the fly?
Well, it comes down to the mechanics of your sentence structure. You have to switch your vocabulary to results-oriented language. The text points out Ivan's specific bad habit here. He's used to saying things like, I worked on the marketing campaign, or I was responsible for a team of 5.
Which sounds very passive. It just kind of proves he existed in a chair for 8 hours a day.
Exactly. It's a task mindset. Olga coaches him to switch to a result mindset. So you drop I worked on, and you replace it with powerful, decisive action verbs.
Like what? Give me an example.
You say, I delivered a 20% increase in engagement, or I achieved a reduction in overhead.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
If I'm coming from a culture that heavily values modesty or, values the collective effort of the team over the individual, saying I delivered or I achieved might feel a bit arrogant. It feels like bragging.
That's a brilliant point, and it's a massive hurdle for a lot of international candidates. But here is the translation of culture you have to make. In a Western interview, claiming your results is not considered bragging, it's considered taking accountability.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If you say, the team did this, the Western recruiter immediately wonders, okay, but were you the one driving it, or were you just getting coffee for the people who did the real work?
That makes total sense. So using I achieved isn't arrogance, it's clarity.
Precisely. You're giving them the clarity they need to actually hire you. When you say, I overhauled a legacy system, you aren't just reading a grocery list of duties. You are telling a micro story about a problem you solved.
And you instantly project authority, which completely neutralizes that initial feeling of being a mess.
Yes. You take back the control.
I love that. You're shifting the focus from the time you spent at your desk to the actual value you brought to the company. But let's be real. Constructing a results-oriented micro-story, finding the right action verb, and remembering your metrics while someone from Google is staring at you, that is incredibly demanding on your cognitive load.
Oh, it's exhausting. I mean, your brain is running translation software, cultural adaptation software, and professional memory retrieval all at the exact same time.
Which leads right into the absolute worst-case scenario, the dreaded blank mind.
Oh, no.
The interviewer asks you, tell me about a time you fundamentally disagreed with your manager. And your brain just gives you television static. You have 0 English words available.
And here we hit one of the most fascinating cultural gaps explored in our text. It has to do entirely with how we perceive silence in a professional setting.
The awkward silence. Honestly, just thinking about it makes my palms sweat.
Right, because in Russian culture and in many fast-paced business environments, silence during an interview feels like a glaring red flag.
It feels like failure.
Yes. If you're asked a question and you just sit there for 4 seconds, your internal panic alarm starts screaming. You feel like you're actively losing the job with every passing millisecond.
It feels heavy. It feels like you're being judged for not being sharp enough to have an instant answer.
But the psychology of a high-level Western interview is actually flipped. Taking a thoughtful pause before giving a confident answer is not seen as a failure. It's viewed as a sign of executive maturity.
Wait.
Truly. It shows you're actively listening, you're processing the nuance of the question, and you aren't just blurting out a rehearsed script.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. So you're saying Western interviewers actually respect the pause. They don't think I'm stupid for stopping to think.
They expect the pause. Look, if they ask you a highly complex question about a career failure and you start answering in half a second, it sounds fake. It sounds like you're playing a pre-recorded tape. A deliberate pause shows authentic, real-time thought.
Okay, but let's talk about the mechanics of this. Because if I know I need to pause to gather my thoughts, what the materials refer to as the idiom buying time, winning a brief moment to formulate an answer, I can't just physically freeze.
No, absolutely not.
Right, if I literally stop moving and stare at the wall in pure silence, the recruiter's going to think my Zoom connection dropped, or worse, that I'm completely terrified.
That is the exact danger. You cannot look like a deer in headlights. You have to actively signal that you are in control of the silence. And this brings us to Olga's most tactical advice.
Which is?
To buy time safely, you have to use a confident filler phrase, a conversational greaser.
A greaser, meaning it Greases the wheels of the conversation so things don't grind to a halt.
Exactly. It keeps the audio flowing while your brain is doing the heavy lifting in the background. But the trick is, it cannot sound hesitant. No ums, no ahs, no, let me think about that.
That just sounds weak. Olga gives Ivan a very specific vocabulary upgrade here, right? She tells him to use the adjective stellar.
Yes, stellar. It literally means star-like or exceptionally outstanding. It's a highly sophisticated, native-sounding replacement for basic words like good or interesting.
I like that.
Yeah, so instead of sitting in a panicked silence, Olga instructs Ivan to look the interviewer in the eye and say, "That's a stellar question."
Let's actually role play this so we can hear the mechanics of it. Give me a tough interview question.
Okay, let's see. Tell me about a time you had to pivot a major project at the absolute last minute because of a sudden client demand.
Wow, that is a stellar question.
Okay, let's break down what you just did.
I bought myself about 4 seconds of pure thinking time.
You did. But look at how you did it. You lowered your pitch slightly, you nodded, and you complimented the interviewer. Psychology tells us that validating the interviewer's intelligence always works in your favor.
That's a great point.
And by using a high-level word like stellar, you positioned yourself as a mature, fluent professional.
It's like a shield. It protects you from the panic. But I have to push back a little here. Does a word like stellar always sound authentic?
What do you mean?
Well, if I'm an engineer from Eastern Europe, and I usually speak in a very direct, understated way, doesn't throwing around words like stellar make me sound like I'm trying a bit too hard? Like I'm doing a bad impression of a Silicon Valley tech bro?
Oh, that is a phenomenal pushback. And tone is everything here. If you say it with fake over-the-top enthusiasm like, "Oh my gosh, what a stellar question," yes, it sounds completely inauthentic. It sounds like a bad sales pitch.
Right.
The secret is delivering it with gravitas. A slow nod, a calm voice. That's a stellar question. It has to sound contemplative, not purely enthusiastic.
Right. It's about taking control of the pacing of the room. You're telling the interviewer, I heard you, I acknowledge the depth of what you asked, and I am preparing a worthy response.
Exactly. You turn a moment of potential anxiety into a moment of authority.
All right, so we've bridged the silence, we bought our time, we complimented their intelligence, but the clock is ticking. The 4 seconds are up. Now, you actually have to deliver the goods. A great filler phrase followed by a weak passive answer is just popping the balloon.
You're entirely right. The filler phrase is just the runway. Now you have to take off.
And this is where we graduate to the elite level of this vocabulary masterclass. Because once you've calmed your nerves, you need to showcase your absolute best self.
The exact idiom the sources use for this moment is to bring your A game.
Bring your A game. It's a phrase heavily used in sports and competitive business. It basically means performing at your absolute peak. You don't bring your C game to the championship.
Right. And in an interview context, especially at the final stage or during a major pitch, bringing your A game means having that results-oriented narrative locked and loaded. They already assume you have the basic technical skills if you made it to the final round. Now they want to see the drive.
And part of demonstrating that drive involves projecting a very specific type of energy. The source text highlights one word that companies absolutely obsess over. The word is proactive.
Oh, man. What's fascinating here is this might be the most critical concept in our entire stack today. To be proactive means creating or controlling a situation rather than just reacting to it after it has happened.
It's the difference between waiting for a fire to start so you can put it out versus installing a smoke detector so the fire never happens in the first place.
Exactly. But here's the trap. Proactive is a massive corporate cliche.
Huge. It's probably the most abused buzzword on LinkedIn right now.
Oh, easily.
If I just sit in an interview and say, I am a very proactive person, the recruiter's eyes are going to glaze over. It means nothing. So why are we telling listeners to focus on a cliche?
Because the secret isn't saying the word, it's demonstrating the mechanism behind it. Olga warns Ivan about this in the text. You don't use proactive as an adjective to describe yourself. You use proactive verbs to describe your actions.
Wait, walk me through that. What does that actually sound like?
Well, if you are reactive, you say, the client was unhappy, so I fixed the bug. You waited for the problem, then you reacted.
Pretty standard.
Right. But if you want to demonstrate that you are proactive, you frame the narrative differently. You say, I analyzed the client's usage patterns, anticipated a bottleneck, and initiated a system update before the bug could affect them.
Oh, that's incredibly different. You didn't even use the word proactive, but the interviewer immediately concludes, wow, this candidate is proactive.
Exactly. You show it through verbs like initiated, anticipated, overhauled, drove, spearheaded. That is what bringing your A game sounds like.
So what does this all mean when we put it together? Looking at the journey Ivan takes in this narrative, being proactive is really the ultimate evolution of the results-oriented mindset we discussed at the very beginning.
How do you mean connect those dots for us?
Well, think about his original fear. He felt like a mess. He was terrified of making a mistake. That fear forces you into a defensive, reactive posture. You just want to survive the interview. Please just ask me a simple question so I can give you a simple grocery list answer.
Right, the survival mindset.
But when you shift to I delivered, when you claim ownership of your results, you take control of the narrative. You aren't defending your resume. You're actively steering the conversation toward your victories. You can't be a mess if you are the one steering the ship.
That is a brilliant synthesis. You aren't just translating your English vocabulary, you are completely transforming your professional posture. You're moving from a passive worker waiting for instructions to an active achiever who drives value.
And when you pull that off, when you buy time gracefully, when you structure your answer with proactive verbs, when you own your results, how does that Western HR manager react? The texts give us one final perfect idiom to describe that validation.
The phrase is spot on.
Spot on, completely correct, perfect accuracy.
But it's more than just being factually correct. Spot on carries a tone of confident and enthusiastic agreement. It's the feeling of a puzzle piece clicking perfectly into place.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, when you deliver a proactive, results-oriented narrative, the interviewer isn't just going to quietly tick a box on their clipboard. They're going to think, yes, spot on, this candidate completely gets it. This is exactly who we need.
It's the ultimate validation. In the text, it's actually Olga's exact response to Ivan when he finally nails the mock interview. He stops apologizing for his English, he takes a strategic pause, and he delivers a story about how he initiated a new coding protocol. And she just smiles and says, spot on.
Because he finally bridged the cultural gap. He stopped trying to prove he knew English grammar and started proving he knew how to be a leader in a Western corporate environment.
Let's take a step back and look at the blueprint we've built today. We started in that dark, universal place of interview panic, that feeling of being a mess, where the language barrier makes you feel incompetent. But you don't have to stay there.
You absolutely do not. The tools are highly structural.
You now know how to drop the passive grocery list. You're going to tell a campfire story using results-oriented language. You know that silence is not a red flag. It is a strategic tool. You can confidently buy time, lower your pitch, and drop a perfectly timed, that's a stellar question. And when the runway is clear, you know exactly how to bring your A game, skip the cliches, and prove through your verbs that you are the proactive professional they're searching for.
You've moved from merely surviving an English interview to actually dominating it.
But before we wrap up this masterclass, looking at all this cultural analysis raises an incredibly provocative question, something we want you to mull over after you take off your headphones.
Right. We've spent this entire session focusing on how this specific mindset and vocabulary helps you navigate a Western English interview. But think about the underlying psychology. If mastering this specific, proactive vocabulary changes the way you interview in English, how might adopting this results-oriented mindset actually start to change the way you view your own daily work and career trajectory in your native language?
Wow. If you start operating like the protagonist of your own career every single day, not just in an interview room, that changes everything. It's not just an English lesson. It's a complete professional upgrade. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into bridging the communication gap. Keep practicing that stellar vocabulary, stay proactive, own your results, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.